For this, I'd like to invite Ms. Chavi Mudgal to come onto the stage and deliver her session. She is the founding CEO of the IMA Endowment Fund, leads operational and strategic vision to establish a world-class endowment, pioneering the organized endowment industry for Indian management schools. The fund serves as IMA's unified fundraising arm, managed by an independent advisory board aiming to solidify IMA's global prominence in thorough leadership and academic excellence. I request Ms. Chavi Mudgal to come onto the stage, and I request everyone to give her a warm welcome. Thank you so much, Chavi.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a delight to be here today, and I'm talking about a sector in financial services which is over $1 trillion globally. But it's considered a little bit orthogonal to finance. It's coming largely from philanthropic contributions, and so it's a bit underserved in terms of having mainstream conversations in, conferences and forums like this. This is the sector of endowment funds. Endowment funds have been around for a very, very long time. Those from the US obviously know this industry extremely well. They also know that endowments are at the pinnacle of investment, cutting-edge, multi-asset management. And there's so much of arbitrage which has been created across portfolio management through endowments. But coming to the Indian ecosystem, it's been very interesting for us to set up this sector pretty much from scratch. The anchor today called it IMA, but it's actually the Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad, which is the school that I represent. So endowments are also affiliated to academic institutes, and they're basically created for the longevity of these academic institutes. IIM Ahmedabad is actually the #1 ranked business school in our country. I'm sure every Indian who's in the room would know this brand well. But even globally, we have alums who've done phenomenally well. For example, the current CEO of World Bank is an alum. The gentleman who runs DBS out of Singapore globally is an alum. Many people in financial services, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, MasterCard, such organizations have been run by Indians who've come out of our business school. Now, the challenge of creating an endowment was really about building an ecosystem of giving in a country like India, which has many, many priorities. And our timing was very interesting. Our timing was really post-COVID, because COVID brought a lot of awareness within our nation in terms of giving back. Also, the systematic wealth creation which has been happening in India is something which is well known. I think even previously the panel referred to the opportunity which is there in India from a demographic perspective, from a future wealth creation perspective, from the growth of the economy perspective. So that systematic wealth creation has also thought about philanthropy. And many, many family offices today have a priority of giving back in an organized way. So endowments really are therefore an ecosystem which are bringing back capital. In our case, it's very specific to this top-notch business school. And then there is a challenge of where those funds are going to be deployed. So interestingly, endowments can be deployed in very, very many ways. They could be, for example, in social entrepreneurship. They could be, for example, in setting up grants for diversity and inclusion. They could be in terms of knowledge building. And I think that's where there's an opportunity perhaps for every individual in the room. So if we're looking to supplement our skills in any way, we're looking for training programs, we're looking for research, we're looking for very specific research. In our case, it's more India-centric, but of course, given the access we have to global alumni, there are opportunities to tie up from a knowledge-building perspective for any sector anywhere in the world. These are all sort of places where endowment funds can get deployed. And then there's also the investment side, which in India is still very, very underserved. It's largely because of regulations currently. We are hoping that many more endowment funds come up in the country, which then systematically lobby with the government in order to enable investments in more asset classes. So today, it's largely focused upon fixed income. A lot of it is in government securities. A lot of it is in long-term bonds, which are backed by the government, so they are sovereign or quasi-sovereign. Why shouldn't this be at least 15% in listed equities and ETFs? Why shouldn't this basically be eventually even in alternate assets, in VC funds, PE funds, maybe a tiny amount even in crypto. So I think that's really the growth of the industry which we foresee in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And we are just off to a small start, and we started this ecosystem in 2021. My own personal background, incidentally, is also mainstream investment banking. I was with UBS and Standard Chartered working out of India for over 15 years. After that, I started a wealth management firm. And then COVID brought to fore, these entire conversations about what really matters. So yes, of course, wealth creation is one thing, but let's also talk about stakeholder capitalism. Let's also talk about the fact that impact sustainability matters. Let's also talk about the fact that academic institutes of repute like ours, which is all of only 60 years old, needs to last long and be there till almost perpetuity. So that was really the thesis with which we started this endowment fund. I do have a presentation which I will go through, but feel free to pause and ask questions because I usually prefer these highly interactive. So I'll talk about the opportunity within Indian higher education itself. The big schools in India today are largely backed by the government. And that's also why endowments become important, because the government can only fund these schools so far. There are many competing priorities for the government, and every educational institute must also become sustainable. So the massive allocation from the Indian government when it comes to higher education, and there are also many private universities, for example, which are getting into India. For those of you, who are into lending type of businesses, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity to look at products which have student loans within India and also for students who are going abroad, because those are also very big numbers. Marrying this to the philanthropic ecosystem in India, private giving has gone up a lot. Education is receiving quite a substantive chunk of this, because I think we all recognize that the big delta in life for all of us, I think education would definitely be one of them, and the pivotal impact that it plays in our lives. And there's a very interesting concept in India called CSR. So this is corporate social responsibility. I'm sure there are regulations like that all over the world, which means that profitable businesses usually invest a certain percentage and give back to society. And education, of course, is one of the big pillars for this. So in India, it's a mandatory contribution of 2%. This is what I call the endowment advantage for academic institutes. So many, many years ago, Nalanda, Takshashila were founded in India. We have Oxford and Cambridge, which have lasted 1,000 years. Closer home in America, we have all these big schools, which are somehow 150 years, 200 years, 250 years. And one of the big reasons that they have indeed lasted so long is because they are backed by long-term capital which is flexible, some of which is coming really from their own kind of alumni or stakeholders who have gained a lot from the institute and then want to sort of try to pay it forward. And there are, of course, massive endowments. So Harvard, Stanford, Princeton would probably be some of the bigger ones. And as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the big reasons for their size is not just the quantum of funds which are being given to them, but it's also the way that they are systematically managing these funds. So this is how we went around structuring the endowment in an Indian context. We already had the academic institute, which in this case was Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. That is governed by a board of governors, which also has representation from the government. It has representation from faculty, from some alums, from eminent industrialists, so on and so forth. And then the senior most academic collaborator or in charge of the institute is the director, under whom you have different faculty, functional heads, chairpersons, deans, and so on. So we created a parallel structure for the endowment foundation, and we wanted to keep this outside the school. And I think that's why when you're trying to set up something new, having the right structure is very important. We wanted a little more degrees of freedom to operate than perhaps what would be possible if we were just a department within the school. Secondly, we wanted to create a governance framework which had basically a board where there was representation from all the stakeholders. So yes, the faculty is important, but there were also a lot of representation from the alums who have benefited so much from the school. And in terms of the functions of the endowment, so I think the first one, even before fundraising, in our case, was engagement. Engagement because we have close to 40,000 alumni worldwide, but a lot of them, have just lost touch with the school. So how do you sort of bring them back into the fold was really something which required a lot of marketing, a lot of evangelizing, almost the equivalent of road shows in each of the key locations, so on and so forth. That then led to fundraising, and our fundraising is also segmented in different ways, and I'll come to that in a minute. Then there's fund deployment, and this cannot only be done by the foundation because the deployment happens with the institute, which is the implementing agency. And that's why having adequate faculty representation and the buy-in of the director on the board of the endowment becomes important. And then you have investments, which are still anchored through the CFO of the institute in discussion with the CEO of the endowment fund, which is currently myself. The other functions of the endowment are really around building consistent stewardship. So whoever's contributed, reporting back to them, again, telling them about the impact they've created, using their word of mouth amongst their batchmates and networks and their geographies to create almost like a multiplier effect of goodwill, and consistent stewardship, which happens through many engagement properties and events which we do. And then there is, of course, it's an independent foundation, so there are basic functions for it, including its own HR, its own payroll, its own admin, its own operations, its own finance, and so on and so forth. We also made sure that we were working with, very big auditors, so like Ernst & Young is our auditor. It just brings that credibility to the entire ecosystem. So here's the segmentation which, through which we basically end up raising funds. The first one is really the category of the donor. So there are some ultra-high net worth individuals, there are some high net worth individuals, there are family offices, and then there are corporates who also, as I mentioned, have a corporate social responsibility. This part is, I think, really interesting, which is the innovation which we are trying to bring in asset classes. In India, traditionally, most people have given back with only cash. However, there are, as we know in financial services, multiple asset classes which are possible. So now we've created a product where people are bequeathing to IMA, and they're thinking about the institute when it comes to their estate planning. We're thinking of art, so actually this is really done well. We have a lot of alums who've contributed art. We've had an art event on campus, and the art is also sometimes showcased on the walls of the institute, and then it is also maintained in the vault and the treasury of the institute. Real estate, because people are bequeathing apartments. This is very illiquid, it's difficult to monetize, but it is happening occasionally. I think the real big arbitrage will come when we start accepting bonds and equity. So there's unfortunately a very annoying regulation in India that the academic institute cannot hold unlisted equity for more than 1 year. And you have to create a trust structure in order to liquidate the security and then make the academic institute the end beneficiary. We're working on this, and if we can make this happen, then people will be able to contribute in stock. There are a lot of entrepreneurs who are coming out of our institute, young people who are investing back in their businesses, who would love to do something for the institute, but I think they don't have the cash to give today. So I think this would open the market up in a big way. And then there are also life insurance policies selectively which come our way. So a lot of work has happened in terms of creating a robust regulatory framework and also creating the right product in order to ensure that we have varied asset classes into the endowment. And then one big way in which we also segment ourselves is really what is the end use. So we talked about deployment earlier, and end use is therefore twofold. One, it can go towards a very specific purpose which the donor or the contributor has in mind. It could be a scholarship, it could be a research chair, so on and so forth. And then the new innovation which we have brought in the Indian market is coming up with a general unrestricted corpus. So people basically give flexible funds which are left to the discretion of the board of the endowment, which is in discussion with faculty, and then deployed for very, very strategic use cases for the institute. Now, why this is interesting is because this is where the investment arbitrage comes into play. The general corpus is not being deployed immediately. The general corpus therefore can invest upon itself, and the higher return it generates, the more and more the corpus will grow. I think I've covered a lot of these points, and this is, sorry, a very text-heavy slide, but I think this really talks about what are our big differentiators. So A, this was conceived by us for the first time for a management school. Second, it's a structure which basically enables a governance format, which is a win-win synergistic situation between alumni, faculty, and all the key stakeholders. Thirdly, the creation of the general corpus, which I just alluded to. And fourthly, we've been very mindful of the history of the institute. So we started this in 2021, backed by some very powerful alums. But even before that, there was obviously people who associated with the institute from a legacy building perspective, etc. They've all been integrated into this endowment effort. We've become a unified fundraising, investing, deployment arm for this academic institute. And we're also shaping this industry in a way that we are kind of helping other counterparts. So there are many other government institutions of repute in India, other IIMs, Indian Institutes of Technology, who are kind of learning from us in terms of how to do this. So in the interest of time, I skipped a couple of slides, but I basically just wanted to talk about the end impact of what is achievable through the world of endowments. We've had an impact in each and every one of these areas, whether it comes to development and infrastructure, centers of excellence which do multifaceted research in very, very interesting areas like artificial intelligence, like blockchain, like data science, like digital transformation, like sustainability. Many of these initiatives are backed by the funds which we have gathered through the endowment. There are endowed chairs which are doing research, for example, in healthcare and so on and so forth. For diversity and inclusion, there are many scholarships and grants that we set up. In terms of our general corpus, it's very interesting, but we basically created grants for entrepreneurship for students, including we are now trying to see if we can do something for social entrepreneurship. We've also set up grants for faculty for case writing. Case writing is a very unique method of teaching in business schools. Harvard was the pioneer in it, and in India, the only school which does it well is our school, which is the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. All these areas, sustainability, upskilling, training of teachers are all sort of various use cases of how endowment funds have been deployed. And this is just, some pictures of our initiatives. The important thing is that it's almost like an ecosystem creation which you're doing, evangelizing the cause for higher education, for the country, talking about needs of your counterparts. Because so many people walk up to me saying, hey, we have a research requirement or a hiring requirement or a training requirement. Help us understand what your institute has to offer. And it eventually leads back, of course, into, if the relationship is working long-term, into something for the endowment fund. Very, very interesting alumni networks, as I mentioned, all over the world. So we've done these, events in Dubai, in London. We're doing one in US this year. We did one in Singapore earlier this year as well. And just in terms of our outcomes, it's a very, very small start in terms of absolute numbers if I compare ourselves to the global schools. So I've personally added about 2.15 billion of commitments in the last 2.5 years. Over and above that, there were some historical commitments also, which IMA had received in the history of the institute. So we are at about 4.5 billion INR in terms of the funds which we look at today. And there are close to 285 new donors which we've added, and that's interesting too, because it's a fairly big number in the context of the fact that the main set of donors we have is about 4,000 to 5,000 alums. So adding 285 of them has been a very, very interesting journey. I hope that we can continue to look at much more innovation in the future. So for example, what is stopping us from doing NFTs of art related to the campus? Or it could be a token which basically gets traded through which, again, like a social token or a philanthropic token through which funds could be raised. So we are very, very open to new ideas like that. And because the theme of today's session was really the challenges and how we've kind of developed this in the last 2.5 years, the last slide just talks about why this ecosystem works. So one, very, very consistent communication, fresh communication. We came up with a film, interestingly, where we interviewed 50 of our, very, very successful, well-to-do alums all over the world. And we talked about the impact the Institute had in their lives and giving back. So that did really, really well. I think transparency and good governance is important in all institution building. Very, very detailed sort of care has been put into our governance frameworks. We work with the top-notch auditor, top-notch lawyers in the country, and so on and so forth. I think this is the most important part because the delta which endowments create is not something which is actually measurable in a year, 2 years, or even 3 years. I mean, now in my 3rd year of operations. It's an immensely long-term approach. We are probably the only ones who are thinking about the fact that the Institute should survive for the next 50, 20, 50, 100, maybe even perpetuity. And lastly, collaborations. So multi-stakeholder collaborations exist. Our corporate partners work very closely with us. Our investment partners work very closely with us. Were we to look at any innovation in asset class, again, those collaborators would work very closely with us. Our board members work very closely with us. We've created, from a marketing perspective, new collaterals which didn't exist. So we call our big contributors founders and co-founders. We do events with them very periodically. This would probably be the best private banking book available in the country. But of course, you are talking to them more from a legacy building and institution building perspective. So it's been a very interesting ride. And we really hope to evangelize the cause of endowment funds in more mainstream financial services formats. And we hope that many more such institutes come up in the future. Happy to take questions now. Thank you.